St. Joseph County Sheriff's Office. How can I help you?
I was wondering, can I get somebody to do a wellness check?
Okay, and what's the person's name?
His name is Father Rene Roberts. I think my brother might have done something to hurt him and stole his car and everything. He made the comment to my dad that Father Rene was tied up.
Do you mean that he's busy or physically tied up?
Physically. And my brother is just crazy enough to do that. He's tied my sister up a couple years back and tried to kill her. That's what we're afraid of, that he might have hurt the old man.
St. Joseph County Sheriff's Office.
Yes, ma'am. I called last night to have a well check done on Father Rene Roberts in St. Augustine, and nobody ever called me back to let me know the verdict of that.
1 second, okay. It says that they didn't actually go out with him. His vehicle was also not there.
Mr. Rene Roberts is not answering his phone still. We're worried about that man.
I got a phone call from my sergeant at the time, and he told us we had a missing priest. And when he told me who it was, it kind of set me back on my heels a little bit.
We made contact with the person who cleaned his apartment, and patrol deputies went inside the apartment with her, and he was not there. I noticed there were some couple of drawers that were pulled out. There was mail everywhere. There was food on the kitchen counter, which appeared that somebody may have taken a bite or two and kind of just left it there.
There was no obvious signs of a struggle. There was no blood. So it looked like he could have just up and left.
Father Rene was very prominent in St. Augustine, which is a town with a very large Catholic population. He had retired from the full-time priesthood, but still did services and different functions for the church.
It'd been several days that no one, even very close individuals, had not heard from him.
The Catholic Church told us about Father Rene missing several appointments, which was very out of character.
It's like he fell off the face of the earth.
My brother was a saint. He always said he was going to be a priest someday. He loved helping people. I remember when he came home and said to my mother and father, I want to teach the deaf. And then he eventually went in to teach the blind too. My brother saw the potential in so many people, and they were your family, no matter who they were. Sometimes I used to think he carried the world on his shoulders because he just wanted so much to make people happy.
Amy Law says her family expected Father Rene to do the prayer service for her 88-year-old grandfather Monday night.
Very sad, and we'd like answers.
The next morning, the priest didn't make it to the funeral home either, and a military chaplain had to step in.
Definitely had a stinking feeling.
Since then, fears about what happened to Father Rene have grown.
So tell me who Father Rene is to you.
So the first time I talked to Father Rene was right after I had my brother arrested. When I asked him to not bond him out, we wanted him to stay there and dry out. My brother is Stephen Murray.
Okay.
My brother got out. He got released from jail. And Father Rene called me when he got out. My brother had already contacted him for money and rides and stuff like that.
Okay.
She told the detectives that Father Rene had become involved with individuals that were troubled per se, that had been in jail. He always tried to actually help them recover, get on the right path. And Father Rene was trying to help Stephen with drug addiction and drug use.
So what made you call the sheriff's office?
My dad came over, and my brother had been staying over there with them since he got released from jail.
Okay.
And so I asked him, how Stephen was doing. He said Stephen left with Father Renee the night before, and that was the last time he'd seen him. I've been dialing his number ever since, like for the past 2 days, and it's going straight to voicemail.
Okay.
And so I'm like, oh my gosh, what if this man is hurt? Stephen is a violent person.
Okay.
So, we just feel like he might have hurt that man.
Does your dad know about all this?
We got a feeling he does, but we think he's trying to cover up for my brother.
Behind the Signal 8 vehicle, we got the Corolla, blue in color. We're on 207 headed towards 95, and looks like he doesn't want to stop.
We're talking he's doing 115, 120 miles an hour on I-95. It's a high-stress situation.
We knew that it was not Father Rene driving. He would never flee from a traffic stop.
We'd get close enough to see there was a white male individual in the driver's seat, but we could not identify him.
I've got him right in front of me, 433 here. We need that vehicle stopped.
We suspected the driver may be Stephen Murray, but we were not sure 100%.
If you can't safely do that, I want you to back off. It's not worth it.
All right, we're in the construction zone. We're going to have to slow it down, guys. 54, we lost him in the construction. We all backed off.
It was a little bit frustrating and upsetting. Whoever was driving the car was a critical piece of the puzzle for us to be able to get to where Father Rene was. Bobby was there by himself. We told him, listen, we need to figure out where Stephen is. We need to talk to him. Bobby said, I can't help you and find him. While we were at his father's residence, Stephen contacted Bobby Murray on the phone and told him that he was running from the police. Stephen said, well, I just outrun multiple deputies. The officer spoke with him and told him he needed to turn himself in. Now we just have to find him.
As an investigator, you're a little conflicted on trying to expedite and get as much information as you can as quickly as possible. There were some things that I would have liked to have confront Bobby Murray on, but we wanted to make sure that we kept him talking and that we didn't give him a reason to be offended or terminate the interview.
Hello. How you doing, sir? My name is Gene Tolbert. I'm a detective with the Major Crimes Unit in St. Johns County. And I realize this is probably a crazy situation for you to be in. But I need your help. Okay? Your son's in a little bit of trouble. Alright? And we need to figure out how we're going to handle this. Okay?
You said a little bit. What you talking about?
Well, I can't answer that right now. Okay? So that's why I need to know what you know, and I can compare it to what I know, and then it kind of gives me a direction from there.
We were working against the clock as far as Father Rene's well-being goes. There was still a hope that we would be able to bring Father Rene home alive. We really felt like that Bobby was going to be the key to unlocking this investigation.
I got a call from detective, and he said, Father Rene, he's missing, and people are very worried. I was so scared for him. I had this feeling I was just so scared for him.
Let me ask you this. Tell me, what do you know as far as your son's activities for the past 3 or 4 days?
He came to the house last night. We walked up to the house. He was drinking. He left the house about 4 hours ago. When he left, he took my phone with him.
Any idea where he went to?
No.
Okay.
He didn't say. He just told me he'd be back in a little while.
When he left earlier, how did he
He
leave?
got, I don't know what kind of car it was.
Could it have been a Toyota Corolla?
It could have been, I don't know.
Well, the reason why I ask is because that's what he was driving tonight when the police chased him.
Yes, sir. I'm saying it could have been.
Okay. And no idea where that car came from?
No, sir.
The car that we spoke of, that you said Stephen showed up in your house, it actually belongs to Father Rene, the person who's been reported missing out of St. Johns County. And the circumstances in which that person went missing are very suspicious. As a detective, my number one question is why is Stephen driving this man's car? And where's this man at?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know. He called me. He said, I got 15, 20 cops cars behind me. And I asked him, I said, son, what the hell are you trying to do? He said, I don't want to leave no more there. He said, I don't want to leave.
Okay.
And that's the exact words he told me. And I told him, I said, son, don't do that to me.
Right. I'm with you.
I can't deal with that.
I'm very concerned about some of Stephen's statements about wanting to die, and I don't want to see Stephen hurt or dead or anything any more than you do. And if he has this kind of, attitude, and
this is what's gonna happen. I already know.
I'm just asking you for your help the best you can.
I was sitting there. That's before he took off.
There are so many scenarios that are possible. If you were to call Stephen right now and tell Stephen that if he wants you to come pick him up, that you'll come pick him up.
He ain't let me do it. He knows I'm here with y'all. He ain't going back to prison.
But I still gotta find this man.
I would have no idea.
After talking to Bobby Murray for a period of time, it seemed futile, and he was just eating away at the clock.
Hang tight with me, and I'll get right back with you, okay?
Yes.
All right.
If he had information, it was pretty clear he wasn't going to share it with us. Blood is thicker than water. It seemed like he would do everything he could to protect his son.
This is exclusive video of Father Rene's family leaving the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office after getting an update on the search for the missing priest. They told me they didn't want to go into detail, but they appeared disappointed and frustrated.
They had tracked the phone to a sparsely populated, heavily wooded area. SWAT starts working down this fire break in the woods, searching for Stephen, and they come upon Father Rene's vehicle. As they're approaching, they find Stephen Murray behind the wheel. Stephen apparently sees some motion or light in his rearview mirror, starts the car up and takes off.
However, he ended up crashing and running away from the vehicle.
So he has fled into basically the jungle.
We thought maybe Father Rene is in the trunk of that vehicle. When they approached and looked, Father Rene was not in there. At that point, we suspected that something bad had happened to Father Rene, but we did not know. We want to bring him back home, whether alive or deceased. Finding Stephen and capturing him alive was a priority.
Just to know that he could kind of be lurking above, kind of in the tree canopy, is a pretty scary scenario. After several hours of kind of keeping constant pressure and perimeter on this area, working it with teams, dogs, and helicopters, we kind of catch a break, and finally, Stephen comes down. I think it was very tiring on Stephen, and I think he just ran out of wind. Fortunately, he didn't have a weapon with him at the time, and he was forced to concede and surrender.
Stephen Murray was originally from Aiken County, South Carolina. We have a history with this guy. My experience in dealing with Stephen, anytime, especially an overbearing male figure moved in aggressively towards him, Stephen would automatically put that wall up and he would shut down. And eventually he's gonna lawyer up.
Haven't seen that green chair. Gentlemen, you want to shut this door here? Gentlemen, if you would. No, thank you. Oh, man. You know where I work at? Paying attention. Where'd you do your time at? Man, I mean, about 20-something crew.
My first and major concern, as everybody's, was for the safety of Father Rene. That's priority. Where is he? Is he safe? But time starts to become our enemy. And Stephen was the only person above ground who knew where Father Rene was. He was the only person.
I know you're not going to ask for it, but would you like something to eat? Because we're hungry.
I didn't tell you. I'm hungry enough to eat the ass out of a whore.
Okay, let me work on that.
Yeah. I'm just tired, man. I'm really not, I'm very, very tired, man. I wish somebody could just help me. I mean, just take this from me, man.
That's what I'm here for. I'm here to talk to you and tell me what I need to do to help you.
Where the hell you get that from?
Like we've been driving all day.
Yeah.
So, which one you want?
I probably want that.
It's easy to have conversation while you're eating food. Takes some of the pressure off. Also, that releases some chemicals in their body, especially if they haven't had any of that in a while. Sometimes makes them a little bit more talkative.
How in the hell did Florida charge me with aggravated fleeing and eluding? And they don't even know that was me driving.
Didn't you talk to a policeman that night? On the phone?
Yeah, I talked to a policeman.
Yeah. Did you tell him you were driving the car?
Talked to a JSO. They said, man, I don't know what you did, but you pissed him off and they want to talk to you. I said, okay, well, I'll turn myself in and talk to him. Didn't tell him I was driving though.
At that point, after eating, we knew he was settled. He was ready to go. He knows that now we're going to start getting into some questioning in more of a confrontational way.
But how fast were you driving to lose all the police cars?
I wasn't driving.
I'm not going to argue with you about it. We know you were,
Yeah,
because you told your dad, you told your sister. You know, we didn't just magic our ways up here.
So you have his car. We haven't heard or seen him since. How does that look?
Man, I understand.
How does that look?
But just because something looks some way, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to refer. It doesn't look good. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It does not look good. This man is missing. We're just out here trying to find him.
I'm a law-abiding citizen. Man, I like smoking another cigarette, man. Y'all asking a lot of questions. If there was something I could do to help you, you know what I'm saying, do that, I would.
When did you get his car?
I think I called him and told him that I had some money for him if he wanted to come get it.
Where do you think you're at?
I think he picked me up right there by my dad's.
What did you do after that?
Me and Father Renee was riding. He didn't know that I was going to meet somebody for some weed, which I didn't tell him that because, you know, he's a priest. I was supposed to be meeting the dude at the kangaroo right there. So I asked Father Renee if he would stand right here for a minute. You know, Father Renee usually does that. I dropped him off, and I never came back. I mean, I ended up doing drugs, and I never came back and got him. And that's how I got his car. And I'm like, oh, I'm in trouble, you know. I shouldn't have did that. And it was too late, you know, so I just kept the car, you know what I mean?
What did you do after that?
Just drove, and I was scared. I mean, I know that I was in trouble.
What do you think he is right now?
No.
Did you ever go back out to that area to look for him?
I'm not sure. I mean, I was probably on drugs and mine somewhere else, you know. I can't even give you an exact date, but it's not something that I keep up with. I can't accurately say that because I don't know.
About what time did you drop him off?
So
on Sunday?
I'm not sure which day it was. I'm really not sure.
We had been talking to him for such a long time, and we were going in circles.
Never been to it. I don't know, man. I don't really know, man. I mean, I'm not real familiar with that area. But,
what was he wearing last time you saw him?
I think he's asking a lot now. I mean, you know, I couldn't honestly tell you what he was exactly wearing.
He's giving non-specific answers. His defenses are up. I don't think we're getting anywhere. So I felt like we need to push it a little bit harder. It's kind of a make it or break it part of that interview, because all Steven's got to do is say, I want my lawyer.
Listen, I think you know a lot more than what you're telling me.
I mean, he could be alive and well somewhere right now. He could be on vacation, for all I know. I mean, he hasn't told me anything. He hasn't told y'all anything, so therefore we all don't know. I mean, I don't know.
Steve, come on now. I'm asking your help. Any piece of information that you can give us so that we can bring him home.
Okay.
That's...
Well, I mean, I'm answering every question you asked, I know.
Well, that's the things that we don't think you're being truthful about.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's opinion, you know. Opinions like ass. Everybody's got one, you know.
What do you think? Is he dead?
I mean, I couldn't tell you. I mean, me personally, I don't know. I mean, I couldn't tell you if he's dead or alive. I mean, because I don't know.
What do you think that happened to him?
Well, you just asked that, and I just gave you an answer, you know. You're asking the same questions, expecting a different answer, you know. That's a definition of sanity. I mean, so if you're going to keep on trying to dig at it, then we ain't got nothing to talk about.
What do you mean?
I mean, you ain't getting nowhere. I mean, if I won't continue to ask the same questions, then I don't think there's nothing else we need to talk about. Smoke a cigarette, man. Y'all got my nerve to a slap up, man. Asking all these 1,100 questions.
Oh, where are you stalking, man?
You want to get a cigarette?
You can see by his attitude he was going to shut down and not talk to us anymore, but you cannot give up.
our job during this interview, get him talking, keep him talking. I was not there to get the confession. It was to make sure that I left the door open for another investigator at another time.
Well, we ready to go, ain't we?
We rocking and rolling, man.
Ready.
What's going on?
I can't call it, man. Another interview? Man, them jokers that just left, asking the same question over and over and over again. I'm just looking at them, man. Can't be serious.
Oh, you're gonna try to make it more comfortable too. The last time I saw you, we were putting you in an ambulance to go to the hospital.
It's probably an overdose.
Kind of an awkward angle.
Now, you remember me, right?
I do.
We sat in my office, remember?
Yes, I do.
And we were straightforward. You were younger then.
I was 16.
Well, you had just turned 17. You just turned 17. The last time we spoke was a burglary. Remember the samurai sword?
Man, you got a good memory.
I do have a good memory.
A good memory.
I do have a good memory.
You can watch his body language. He's uncrossed his arms. He's sitting back in the chair again. He's not slumped over. He's looking up again.
It was best for people that he had encountered in the past to walk in that room, just put him a little bit more at ease. Stephen Murray had had a very, very difficult and abusive childhood. We knew if you touched on that emotion that Stephen carries inside of him and then back off of it, that would open a door, a floodgate.
But I'm wondering, you've got a decent head on your shoulders. Why would you get messed up in something that you got to be sitting in a sheriff's office at some ungodly hour?
Well, you know, it's like you got this baby, newborn baby. And you raise that baby. Hate, hurt, destroy, rape. You know? And the baby grows up on that.
Becomes a product of their environment.
Becomes a product of their environment.
You got it rough.
Yeah, I mean, but hey, what can I do about it, you know?
Get dealt the hand, you do what you can with it.
Right, you pray about it, but hell, my knees is tired and my knees is getting sore. My damn knees are sore. I got calluses on them. I need some prayer.
You know what? Those calluses tighten you up, man. I don't blame you for that.
I am who I am. So when I jump out the car and run and y'all holler, don't do it, Steve, and that's how good y'all know me.
You were straight with me and I was straight with you.
I tried my whole life to change who I am. I'm a sick puppy. I mean, I'm sick. I try to be that.
And it tires you out, don't it?
Destroy it.
You're mentally tired.
Because I don't want to be that
You're
person.
not physically tired, you're mentally tired.
Mentally, I mean, I'm
You need a
tired.
rest. You need a mental rest. But, do you know where it really all begins?
Again, when you being honest with yourself.
There you go. Stephen came back to life. He was initiating, he was engaging. And when that happens, that opens the door for the potential for something else to follow up. We're done. Let's go smoke. I don't smoke, but you are. Here. You right-handed, right? Give me your left hand. I walked out being 100% satisfied with what we got because I knew there's an opportunity for tomorrow.
The search for Father Rene is not over. Numerous sites have already been looked at, and more are to follow. Father Rene is still missing, but his presence is still felt at the San Sebastian Catholic Church.
We are going to find him, and we're going to bring him home.
How you feel about going back to Florida, man?
I feel real good. Damn, girl, you made it up here?
We thought that I was going to soften him up and get him to talk.
It was obvious that they had a very close relationship, but there was a calculated risk in putting Bobby Jean in this position. Stephen was being so unpredictable at that point. Everybody's fear was that he was going to shut down completely.
We brought your sister here. She's obviously told us that you got a big heart, that you're not a bad man. We're just trying to bring closure to the family, find out where he's at, so we can bring him home.
And I don't want you to think that I'm going against you right now. I just want you to do the right thing for a change. Okay? I'm not going to look at you any different than you being my brother, and I love you.
Love you too.
Tell me one thing. You ain't got to say nothing else. Just say yes or no. Can I help him or not?
I don't know, Dean.
I think we want to see you do the right thing, and, you know, regardless of whatever it is, we're here.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate it. And I ain't got nothing to say. I mean, I ain't got nothing to say to you. I mean, I really don't.
You ain't willing to throw me any hints?
All the way to the grave. Like I always have. I'm sorry I had to taste this plate with me. I'm sorry for that, man. We all make bad decisions in our life. Unfortunately, I made a lot of them, you know?
There was a moment you can see his face expression change, his body posture change, and he kind of just slumped to the side, and all of us were convinced that he was going to break down. And we thought that was the moment for us to actually go at him hard.
They're building a big case for you down in Florida.
You look like the Statue of Liberty, and I'll try to knock it down.
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen.
We need to bring the priest home. You just got to face him. Okay? And lying is not going to fix anything.
I think I'm lying, man.
Because you are.
You are, Stephen.
Calling me a liar to my face.
That's right.
Well, I mean, I reckon I like to exercise my rights then.
I felt like he punched me in the mouth when he said that.
He pulled the trigger and did his Miranda warnings, and that was that. We're done. I tell you, it was soul crushing to be that close.
The reality was that we may never be able to locate him. We had to come up with a new strategy on how to move forward and get our heads back in the game.
Hey,
What you doing?
we're going through hell out here that we don't even deserve. People talking to us, talking about that we used to help you cover up stuff and all, and we probably know where Father Renee is. We don't know how much more we can handle. I just broke down and cried yesterday because we don't deserve this. My kids don't deserve this.
I'm sorry, Gene. I mean, hell, what do you want me to do? I mean, tell me.
I just want you to be honest with them, regardless of the situation. This ain't gonna be over with until they find Father Renee.
I love you with all my heart.
My cell phone rings, and I learned Stephen Murray has asked to speak to detectives. We didn't know about what, but he wanted to talk to us.
He had made a phone call to Bobby Jean, and I do believe that conversation with Bobby Jean could have been a very pivotal moment for Stephen. I was hoping that Stephen was ready to talk. He was getting ready to get it off his chest and tell us.
Okay. All right. It's your show, brother. We're just here to watch. Tell us.
Right. Well, the first part of the story I told y'all where Father Renee picked me up and I was going to pay him the money, which was true. And I picked him up after I got back from the dope trap down off 90. And We went up to South Carolina, you know, I said, I want to see my kids.
Did he say he didn't want to go?
He said no point that he didn't want to go. He just said, okay. I mean, I wasn't aggressive with it or anything, you know. I wanted to go see my kids.
Where's he at in the car?
He's in the trunk by that point.
He's in the trunk. Okay. Is he tied up or anything like that?
No, sir.
How'd you get him to get in the trunk?
I asked him to.
Did you say or else?
No, I didn't say or else. I said, I need you to get in the trunk, Father Renee. He said, okay. I'm right in there, you know. I helped him in there and told him, I said, just do what I tell you to and everything's going to be okay, you know. And, you know, I'm talking to him, you know, and he's still telling me, you know, that I'm in great trouble and that I'm never going to get away with this. And I'm thinking, you know, like, oh, man, you know, maybe I am in a great deal of trouble. I guess I got real skitsed out, man. Scared, I guess, you know. I mean, scared for me, scared for my life.
Is there something that snaps in your head like, hey, I got to take care of this, or this is going to be a problem, or?
If he going to go back and tell on me, though, and get me in trouble, I mean, and you might as well just go ahead and get rid of you know.
Okay. So tell me about that. What happened with that?
Well, he's steady talking to the trunk, you know. He's hollering, I gotta use the bathroom. And I said, okay, you know, I'm gonna let you out in just a second, you know. And so I stopped and let him out to use the bathroom. I had a 9mm, and I shot him.
Okay. So, like, me and you are looking at each other right now, you shot him like that?
It was more of from the side. And then he fell and I shot him in the head.
Okay.
And left.
Just listening to Stephen talk about the way he murdered Father Rene in such a cold and callous way, it's one of the times in my career that I've actually felt the presence of evil in an interview room.
Shot him in the, I think, the chest one time and in the head the last time.
Stephen finally confessed Father Rene was no longer alive. He's dead somewhere, but he still needed to come clean and tell us where the body was. Finding the priest and bringing him back home and making sure that the family got a proper burial for him was critical.
Well, tell us what happened with where you say you killed Father Rene. Where did that occur at? Like on the side of the road or a gas station?
Side of the road.
Okay.
It's a real wooded area.
Real wooded area?
Yeah, like, you know, y'all would have never found him. It happened in Georgia, closer to South Carolina.
You know what highway it is? What road? 'Cause I know you know those roads like the back of your hand up there.
Yeah.
You know it better than I do.
Yeah, I know the roads, but I mean, I would have to take you.
Okay.
To it, I mean, because, I mean, period. I mean, I don't want to sit here. I like to ride for a minute, you know. But I mean, as far as like taking you to the exact location, I would have to be in the car and point it out.
So we were all thinking he's playing games again.
I think that gave Stephen a certain sense of power and authority, and that he was in charge in that situation. But the decision was made to put Stephen in a car. And almost immediately when we pulled up, we saw a flock of buzzards kind of take off, which kind of drew our attention over, and you could see Father Rene's body laying at the edge of the woodline. It's an emotional roller coaster, obviously. Tugs on your heart. It eats away at your being sometimes, but it's about getting to the truth.
Ultimately, it's very important that we find closure for loved ones of the deceased.
It was a special ceremony for a man who meant so much to so many here in our community. People came from all over to say goodbye to the beloved priest. He touched the hearts of so many.
He was a gift and a blessing to us.
And with that, it was time to send off Father Rene.
Without the interviews, I don't think that this case would have came to the conclusion that it did. And I do believe that justice was served in this case, but I don't think there's any amount of resolution for this case that would ever satisfy anybody. People saw the killing of a Catholic priest as kind of an attack on our very fiber. And I really think that stirred emotion in a lot of people. Father Rene had actually talked about possibly dying at someone's hands in the future. And that if that had ever happened, his wishes would be that that person not be subjected to the death penalty. So it was agreed upon that Stephen would plead guilty to life in prison for malice murder, and he would spend the rest of his life behind bars.
I believe it was a gift from my brother, Father Rene, to love and not hate, no matter what. So I, in my heart, have forgiven Stephen for taking my brother's life. I know my brother's with God, and we'll be all together someday. But you gotta let it go. You gotta let the anger go and the hatred go and just love.
It began with a silence that felt too heavy for the hour, a stretch of Texas highway holding its breath just after midnight, the kind of quiet that makes even seasoned deputies uneasy before they know why. A pickup sat angled on the shoulder as if it had second thoughts about leaving the road, hazard lights blinking in a slow, tired rhythm, orange pulses cutting weak lines through the dark. When the first patrol car rolled to a stop, the engine ticking as it cooled, the night offered no explanation. Only a shape behind the wheel that didn't move, a body leaning forward, head bowed, as if caught in prayer that came too late. The door was unlocked, the key still in the ignition. Blood traced a narrow path along the frame, already drying, already claiming the air with the unmistakable metallic smell that tells you everything before anyone speaks. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a breakdown gone wrong. This was violence that had arrived quickly and left without ceremony, leaving behind a question mark shaped like a human life. Texas in 1988 liked its certainty. Towns were stitched together by routine, by high school football schedules and Sunday sermons, by the comforting knowledge that trouble usually announced itself before crossing city limits. This road wasn't supposed to be a headline. The victim wasn't supposed to be a name read aloud by strangers. She had left earlier that evening with nothing more dangerous in mind than the miles ahead, her world reduced to headlights and familiar turns, unaware that someone else's decision was already intersecting with her own. By dawn, the road was cordoned off with yellow tape that fluttered in the warm breeze like a warning nobody had asked for. Investigators moved with practiced urgency, cameras clicking, flashlights sweeping the interior of the truck, notebooks filling with observations that felt both precise and inadequate. There were no skid marks, no shattered glass, no sign of a struggle nearby. Whatever had happened, it had been controlled, deliberate, almost efficient. That, more than anything, unsettled the officers on scene. The victim's purse sat on the passenger seat. Cash untouched. Identification intact. No obvious motive announcing itself. Her hands told a story of surprise, not defense. The angle of her body suggested she had been sitting when it happened, not dragged, not chased. The implication was chilling. She had trusted someone enough to stop, enough to stay still, enough to never see the danger coming. News traveled faster than the investigators wanted it to. Before the sun climbed high enough to burn off the morning haze, Whispers were already turning corners, slipping into kitchens and classrooms, changing tone as they went. A murder on the highway. A woman alone. No suspect. No explanation. The local paper pushed the story to the front page by afternoon, the word mysterious doing the work that facts couldn't yet accomplish. The community reacted the way communities always do when certainty fractures. Doors locked earlier. Kids were picked up instead of walking home. Conversations dropped to whispers when unfamiliar faces passed by. Trust, once assumed, became conditional. People began to inventory their memories, replaying the previous night in search of anything that now felt important. A truck seen at a light. A man standing too close at the gas station. A sound that might have been a shout or might have been nothing at all. Detectives canvassed relentlessly, chasing tips that arrived by the hour. Some were earnest, others desperate, a few malicious. Every lead carried the weight of hope, and every dead end added another layer of frustration. A waitress remembered a customer who wouldn't meet her eyes. A neighbor recalled hearing an engine rev late at night. A trucker claimed he'd seen headlights pulled over. Another vehicle parked close behind. None of it aligned cleanly. Memory blurred under pressure. Timelines shifted. Details contradicted each other in ways that couldn't be reconciled. Evidence was logged, bagged, labeled with care that bordered on reverence. Fibers that didn't belong to the victim. Soil on the floorboard that didn't match the shoulder of the road. A faint chemical scent lingering in the cab. Noted but unexplained. In 1988, investigators worked with what they had, not what they wished they had. DNA was a promise more than a tool, a concept discussed with cautious optimism, not something you could lean on to break a case open. As days passed without an arrest, the language changed. Urgent softened into ongoing. Developing gave way to under investigation. The victim's family learned to read between those words, to recognize the moment when confidence thinned into endurance. Detectives still visited, still asked questions, but the intensity ebbed, replaced by the quiet grind of a case refusing to yield. Suspicions took root where answers should have been. Names surfaced, circulated, then fell away, leaving scars behind. In a town this size, accusation lingered longer than evidence. Friendships cooled. Old grievances found new fuel. The murder didn't just take a life. It rearranged relationships, redrew invisible boundaries, taught people to look at one another differently. Weeks stretched into months. Months into years. The highway returned to its original purpose. Traffic flowing over the same stretch of asphalt, where violence had once interrupted the night. New paint faded. Grass grew tall again. But the case never truly left. It lived in filing cabinets, in evidence rooms, in the uneasy way older residents still referenced that night, without needing to explain which one they meant. Every few years the cold case resurfaced briefly like a body breaking water. A new detective with fresh eyes reviewed the file. Evidence was re-examined, retested when budgets allowed. A rumor sparked renewed interest, only to fizzle under scrutiny. Each revival raised expectations just long enough to break them again, reinforcing a quiet, communal belief that this story would never have an ending. The family endured birthdays marked by absence, holidays reshaped by grief. They became unwilling experts in the vocabulary of unresolved loss, learning how to live with questions that never slept. Closure became a word other people used, not something they recognized anymore. Time moved on, indifferent. Technology advanced. Methods improved. The world changed in ways no one involved in the original investigation could have predicted. And somewhere, sealed in boxes that bore the marks of age and handling, pieces of the truth waited, patient, unchanged by decades. When the file was pulled again, it wasn't dramatic. No sirens. No confession. Just a moment of quiet realization. A discrepancy noticed by someone who wasn't there the first time. Someone unburdened by old assumptions. A detail that had always existed, overlooked not out of negligence but familiarity. The kind of oversight that only time can correct. The cold case stirred. Databases were checked. Samples compared. Names once dismissed were reconsidered under harsher light. The past, long assumed dormant, began to exert pressure on the present. People who believed this crime belonged to history felt the ground shift beneath them, subtle at first, then undeniable. In Texas, decades after that silent highway claimed a life, the case was no longer just a memory. It was active again, alive with possibility and danger, dragging old wounds into the open and daring everyone involved to look at them without flinching. And as the investigation moved forward, one truth became impossible to ignore. Whatever had been buried in 1988 was never meant to stay there forever. The file didn't scream when it was opened again. It didn't announce itself as unfinished business. It lay there quietly on a metal desk, edges softened by time, smelling faintly of paper, dust, and decisions made long ago. Inside were the same photographs, the same reports, the same handwritten notes that had once felt urgent and now felt historical. But cold cases don't need noise to wake up. They only need one person willing to stare a little longer at what everyone else had learned to stop seeing. The detective assigned to the review hadn't grown up here. That mattered. There was no muscle memory pulling his thoughts toward familiar conclusions, no old grudges, no names that came pre-labeled as good or bad. To him, the victim was not a neighbor's daughter or a classmate's cousin. She was a timeline, a set of facts, a series of decisions that ended violently on a dark road. Distance gave him clarity, and clarity made certain details impossible to ignore. The first thing that bothered him was the stop itself. Why here? Why this stretch of road, far enough from town to be quiet but close enough to feel safe? The truck wasn't disabled. The engine had been running. The victim had not attempted to flee. That combination suggested control, not chaos. Someone had orchestrated the moment, guided it, shaped it into something that left minimal trace and maximum confusion. He read witness statements with a colder eye, separating emotion from observation. The headlights, the second vehicle, the vague descriptions that had once been dismissed as unreliable. Patterns began to emerge, not clear enough to convict, but sharp enough to disturb. Multiple witnesses, independent of one another, had described a similar silhouette. A taller vehicle, boxy, light-colored. Too generic to be useful in 1988. Less so decades later, when vehicle registrations could be cross-referenced, narrowed, interrogated by algorithms instead of memory. The evidence boxes were brought out, one by one, like artifacts from a crime scene museum that no one wanted to curate. Inside them, sealed in plastic and paper, were pieces of the night that refused to age gracefully. Fibers, hair, soil samples. Items that had once meant nothing more than possibility now carried potential weight. The lab requests were sent quietly, without expectation, the way seasoned investigators learn to protect themselves from disappointment. While the science worked, the detective worked the human side. He tracked down names that had drifted off the map. Witnesses who had moved, officers who had retired, locals who had built new lives far from this road and this story. Some didn't want to talk. Some talked too much. Time had changed them all. Memories calcified. Guilt fermented. Fear learned to disguise itself as irritation. One name surfaced repeatedly, not as a suspect, but as a constant presence near the edges of the original investigation. A man who had been interviewed early, released quickly, and forgotten easily. He owned a vehicle that matched the vague descriptions. He had been working odd hours at the time. His alibi had relied on someone who no longer lived in the state, someone who had never been recontacted. Back then it had been enough. Now it felt thin. The detective didn't rush. Cold cases punish impatience. He rebuilt the timeline minute by minute, layering known facts over estimated movements, comparing what should have happened with what actually did. The victim's route. The likely point of contact. The window of opportunity. It narrowed like a tightening noose, and at its center sat that same overlooked name. Heavier now, harder to dismiss. When the lab results came back, they didn't explode the case open. They whispered. Partial matches. Degraded samples. Enough to suggest, not enough to declare. But suggestion was all the detective needed to keep going. He pushed for genealogical comparisons, a technique that didn't exist when the victim was alive, a method that turned family trees into investigative tools. Took months. Quiet months. Months where nothing happened on the surface and everything shifted underneath. In the meantime, the town felt it. Unmarked cars parked a little too long. Questions asked by people with unfamiliar faces. Old rumors revived in new mouths. The case, once dormant, began to cast a shadow again, long and uncomfortable. Some welcomed it, hoping for resolution. Others resented it, afraid of what might be unearthed after all this time. The family was notified cautiously. No promises. No declarations. Just a careful explanation that the case was active again, that new methods were being applied, that patience would be required. Patience was something they had mastered against their will. Hope, however, was more dangerous. It threatened to reopen wounds that had scarred over just enough to function. The genealogical trail didn't lead straight to a name. It never does. It led to a cluster of relatives, a web of connections that had to be untangled by hand. Old records, obituaries, marriage licenses. Slowly, methodically, the web narrowed, pointing back toward the same man who had once sat across from detectives in 1988. Calm enough to pass, forgettable enough to disappear. Surveillance began quietly. The man was older now. Slower. His life looked ordinary from the outside, the kind of life that blends into its surroundings. No criminal record that matched the violence of the crime. No obvious tells. That too was unsettling. The absence of chaos where chaos had once been suggested raised more questions than answers. Investigators watched patterns instead of personalities. Where he went, who he spoke to, how he reacted to unexpected encounters. They compared his movements now to what they believed his movements had been then. It wasn't proof. It was alignment. A sense that the shape of his life fit too neatly into the negative space of the crime. When they brought him in again decades after the first interview, the room felt different. This wasn't the hurried urgency of an active murder investigation. This was surgical. Precise. The questions were narrower. The pauses longer. The man noticed. He asked why this was happening now. He smiled at the wrong moments. He corrected details he shouldn't have remembered. The interview ended without an arrest. That was deliberate. Pressure works best when applied gradually. Investigators wanted him to leave with uncertainty, to feel the past stir beneath his present. They wanted him to wonder what they knew, what they didn't, and how long he had before those two things aligned. Outside the station, the town held its breath without realizing it. Whispers thickened. Old arguments resurfaced. People who had once defended the man found themselves reevaluating their certainty. Others felt vindicated, uneasy about how long it had taken. The cold case was no longer an abstract concept. It had a pulse again, irregular but undeniable. Behind closed doors, prosecutors were cautious. Decades-old cases collapse under their own weight if mishandled. They needed more than suspicion, more than alignment. They needed something solid enough to survive cross-examination, strong enough to justify reopening a wound this deep. Investigators returned to the evidence, the timelines, the human cracks that time had widened instead of sealed. And slowly, inexorably, the pieces began to press together. Not cleanly, not comfortably, but enough to suggest that the silence of that Texas highway in 1988 had not been random, that the violence had not vanished into the dark, that the truth, long delayed, was finally testing the strength of the present. The cold case was no longer cold. It was warming, dangerous, volatile. And everyone involved could feel that the moment of impact was approaching, whether they were ready for it or not. The second interview changed the temperature of the room before a single question was asked, the kind of shift that seasoned investigators feel in their bones long before they can justify it on paper. The man sat down slower this time, eyes scanning corners he hadn't noticed decades earlier, posture stiff with the awareness that this was no longer a courtesy conversation resurrected from nostalgia. This was pressure. Quiet, deliberate, accumulating pressure, the kind that doesn't rush because it doesn't have to. They didn't accuse him. Accusations closed doors. Instead, they talked about time. About how memory fades for some people and sharpens for others. About how technology has a way of catching up to old mistakes. They laid photographs on the table, not of the crime scene, but of the road, the truck, the darkness, images neutral enough to invite commentary. He spoke too quickly. Filled silence with unnecessary detail, corrected the order of events before anyone challenged it. Each sentence added weight to the growing sense that the past was closer to him than he wanted to admit. Outside the interview room, analysts cross-checked his statements against what little could be verified. Tiny inconsistencies surfaced, not lies exactly, but fractures, places where the story bent under scrutiny. His alibi, once accepted without question, had dissolved entirely. The person who'd vouched for him had died years earlier, leaving behind no written confirmation, No record strong enough to anchor his claim. What remained was a gap, wide enough for doubt to settle in comfortably. The genealogical results came back in stages, frustrating and incomplete like a map with missing streets. But the direction was clear. The DNA recovered from the victim, once dismissed as unusable, now pointed toward a family line that intersected with the man's ancestry in ways that were increasingly difficult to explain away. Prosecutors were briefed in careful language, emphasizing probability, not certainty. They listened, asked hard questions, pushed back where they should. This was a case that could not afford shortcuts. As investigators pressed forward, the town began to fracture along familiar lines. Some residents welcomed the renewed attention, clinging to the idea that justice delayed could still be justice. Others recoiled, defensive, irritated that the past was being dragged into the present with such force. For them, the case had become a settled tragedy, painful but contained. Reopening it felt like an accusation directed at the entire community, a reminder that normalcy had once failed and might do so again. The family lived in a state of suspended anticipation, careful not to celebrate progress, cautious about hope. They had been here before, promised movement that evaporated under scrutiny. Still, something felt different this time. The questions were sharper, the visits more frequent, the silence between updates heavier with implication. They braced themselves for either outcome, knowing both resolution and disappointment carried their own kind of pain. Investigators returned to the physical evidence with renewed purpose. The soil sample, once a footnote, was re-examined by a specialist who compared it against geological surveys unavailable in 1988. The result was narrow, precise, unsettling. The soil did not match the crime scene. It matched a location miles away, a place with no official connection to the victim, a place linked indirectly, circumstantially, to the man now under scrutiny. It suggested movement, preparation, a sequence of events that extended beyond that silent stretch of highway. They reconstructed the night again, this time allowing themselves to consider a darker possibility. The stop hadn't been spontaneous. The road hadn't been chosen at random. The victim had been guided, maybe coerced gently, into pulling over. Authority implied rather than enforced. Trust exploited rather than broken outright. It explained the absence of struggle, the lack of chaos, the efficiency that had unnerved officers from the start. Phone records from the era were scarce but not non-existent. Old billing logs, archived and forgotten, revealed patterns that aligned uncomfortably well with the emerging theory. Calls made, calls received, a window of silence that coincided too neatly with the estimated time of the crime. None of it was definitive. All of it was suggestive. In cold cases, suggestion accumulates until it becomes something heavier. When the warrant request was drafted, it was written with restraint. No dramatic language. No assumptions masquerading as facts. Just a careful presentation of what could be proven, what could be inferred, and why, after all these years, the balance had finally tipped. The judge read it slowly, aware of the consequences either way. Granting it meant reopening a wound the town had learned to live around. Denying it meant sealing that wound forever. The arrest came early in the morning, deliberately unceremonious. No sirens. No spectacle. Just a knock on a door that had never expected to answer for 1988 again. The man appeared older than his years, eyes narrowing as he recognized the faces on his porch, the weight of inevitability settling in before the words were spoken. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, phones pressed to ears, disbelief rippling outward faster than the official announcement. By noon, the headline had spread far beyond town limits. Texas 1988 cold case cracked. Surprise arrest. Old wounds reopened. The language was sharp, confident, almost triumphant. The reality was messier. Relief mixed with dread. Validation collided with fear. People who had once defended the suspects scrambled to reconcile their certainty with the present. Others wondered how they had lived so close to unanswered violence for so long without demanding more. Inside the station, the interrogation resumed, different now, heavier. The man listened as evidence was presented not as a trap, but as an accumulation. Each piece placed deliberately, each silence allowed to stretch. He denied involvement with increasing rigidity, explanations growing thinner as the gaps closed in. When confronted with the DNA linkage, his composure cracked just enough to be noticed. Not panic, recognition. The prosecutors cautioned patience. Arrest was not conviction. Decades-old cases crumble under aggressive missteps. They needed corroboration that could survive the scrutiny of defense attorneys trained to weaponize time itself. Witnesses would be challenged, memories discredited, evidence questioned for contamination and degradation. Every move now had to be flawless. The family was notified of the arrest in a room that felt too small for the moment. There were no cheers, no tears of joy, just a long exhale, shaky and uncertain. As reality recalibrated itself around a possibility they had stopped allowing themselves to imagine. Justice, once abstract, now had a shape, but its edges were sharp, capable of cutting as deeply as they healed. As the man was transferred to county jail, the town felt the tremor settle in. Conversations shifted. Old stories were retold with new emphasis. People revisited the night in their minds, testing their own memories, questioning their assumptions. The cold case had become a mirror, forcing everyone to confront not just what had happened, but what had been overlooked, ignored, or accepted too easily. And beneath the headlines, beneath the procedural momentum, a darker question lingered, unspoken but insistent. If this case had waited decades to surface the truth, how many others were still buried, mistaken for silence, mistaken for resolution, waiting for the moment when time, technology, and persistence would finally collide? The arrest had cracked the case open. It had not yet sealed it shut. And as the legal process began to grind forward, slow and unforgiving, the community realized that the real reckoning was only beginning, that whatever came next would demand more than belief, more than relief, and more than the comfort of finally having a name to attach to a night that had never let them go. The days after the arrest stretched unnaturally long, each hour heavy with scrutiny, every routine action suddenly suspect, as if the town itself had been placed under interrogation. News vans lingered at intersections that had never seen them before. Microphones appeared where neighbors once exchanged small talk. The name of the man in custody echoed through kitchens, barrooms, and church halls, spoken softly at first, then with sharper edges, each repetition reshaping the memory of who he had been and what people thought they knew. Inside the jail, the man adjusted to confinement with a discipline that unsettled those watching him. He requested specific books. He asked about the process. He wanted to know timelines, not outcomes. There was no visible collapse, no dramatic confession, only a careful retreat into formality, as if structure itself could shield him from the chaos unfolding outside. Detectives took note. Calm they knew was not innocence. Calm was calculation stretched over decades. The prosecution began assembling its case with the caution of someone handling unstable material. Every piece of evidence was scrutinized not just for what it suggested but for how it might be attacked. The defense would argue degradation, contamination, coincidence. They would weaponize the years between the crime and the arrest, painting the investigation as a desperate reach backward fueled by technology that promised more than it could deliver. The state needed to be ready for all of it. Witnesses were contacted again, some reluctantly, some with a strange relief that bordered on guilt. Time had changed their faces and softened their voices, but memory, when prompted correctly, still carried weight. One former trucker admitted he had minimized what he saw in 1988, afraid of being pulled deeper into something violent and unresolved. A former gas station clerk confessed she had recognized the suspect's vehicle years later, but told herself it was coincidence, easier to dismiss than confront. Each admission felt like another layer of the past peeling away, exposing raw hesitation where certainty had once been claimed. The defense moved quickly, filing motions designed to slow momentum and test resolve. Suppression hearings loomed. Experts were lined up to challenge the reliability of genealogical DNA, to question whether probability could masquerade as proof. They emphasized the absence of a confession, the lack of direct eyewitnesses placing the suspect at the moment of violence. Their strategy was clear. Fracture the narrative, isolate each piece of evidence, and argue that none of it could stand alone. The judge listened with the expression of someone fully aware that this case carried more than legal consequences. Decisions here would ripple outward, affecting not only the accused and the victim's family, but the collective faith in whether time could ever be an ally of justice. Each ruling landed carefully, neither favoring spectacle nor dismissing innovation outright. The case would proceed. Slowly, publicly, without shortcuts. As pretrial hearings unfolded, the town oscillated between fascination and fatigue. Some residents followed every update obsessively, parsing legal language, speculating on outcomes. Others withdrew entirely, exhausted by the emotional whiplash of caring again after learning how to survive without answers. Businesses displayed news clippings in windows, then quietly took them down. The case was everywhere and nowhere at once, an undercurrent shaping conversations even when no one mentioned it directly. The victim's family navigated a parallel reality. Interviews were requested, declined, reconsidered. They wanted the truth to be heard but feared how easily it could be distorted. Grief, once private and contained, was now subject to public consumption, analyzed for authenticity, judged for timing. They learned quickly that resolution did not bring peace. It brought exposure, reopening wounds to fresh air and unfiltered opinion. Investigators continued working behind the scenes, refining timelines, revisiting maps, confirming details that had once seemed trivial. The soil analysis was strengthened by additional samples, narrowing the origin further. It pointed toward a property the suspect had access to in 1988, a place he had described as insignificant, rarely visited. Records contradicted him. Utility logs, maintenance receipts, small bureaucratic traces of presence that told a quieter but more reliable story. When confronted with this new information, the suspect's demeanor shifted subtly. His answers grew shorter. His eyes lingered on the table instead of the faces across from him. He asked fewer questions. Silence, once filled eagerly, now settled comfortably between statements. Detectives recognized the change. The walls were closing in, not dramatically, but inevitably. The defense seized on every inconsistency, every delayed recollection, every lost document. They argued that memory could not be trusted across decades, that witnesses were reconstructing rather than recalling. In many cases, they were right. Memory is fragile. But the prosecution countered with convergence, with the way independent strands of evidence bent toward the same conclusion without being forced. Coincidence, they argued, does not repeat itself this cleanly. As the trial date approached, jury selection loomed as its own battleground. Finding impartiality in a community this connected was a challenge bordering on impossible. Prospective jurors admitted familiarity with the case, opinions shaped by headlines and history. Many were dismissed. Others insisted they could separate past from proof. The process dragged on, underscoring the tension between local impact and legal necessity. Outside the courthouse, the road where it all began remained unchanged, a quiet stretch of asphalt indifferent to the human drama unfolding because of it. Drivers passed without slowing, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the weight carried by that location. It was a reminder that places absorb violence and then continue, while people struggle to do the same. When opening statements finally arrived, the courtroom felt smaller than it had during hearings, packed with expectation and unease. The prosecution spoke of patience, of science catching up to silence, of a life interrupted and a truth delayed. The defense spoke of doubt, of the danger of retrofitting evidence to satisfy a longing for closure. Both narratives were compelling. Both demanded belief. As witnesses took the stand, the past unfolded not as a single story, but as fragments stitched together under oath. Each testimony added texture, depth, and occasionally contradiction. The jury listened, faces neutral, notebooks filling with observations they would later be asked to transform into judgment. The accused watched intently, expression guarded, as if measuring the weight of each word against his own carefully constructed version of events. Experts explained DNA with diagrams and analogies, translating probability into language meant to convince without overwhelming. Defense experts followed, highlighting margins of error, reminding the jury that science evolves, that certainty is rare. The back and forth created a rhythm that mirrored the case itself. Advance, resist, advance again. Throughout it all, the family sat quietly, absorbing every detail, every implication. For them, the trial was not an intellectual exercise. It was a reopening of the night that had never truly ended, a public dissection of loss they had carried privately for decades. Each witness, each exhibit, was another reminder that the past was not content to stay buried. As the prosecution rested its case, the town waited, suspended between belief and doubt. The cold case that had once felt abstract now demanded a verdict, a conclusion strong enough to withstand time's erosion. Whatever the outcome, one truth had already emerged unmistakably. The arrest had not healed old wounds. It had exposed them raw and unfiltered, forcing a reckoning not just with what happened in 1988, but with how long it had taken to face it. Deliberations began without ceremony, the jury filing into a room stripped of personality, carrying with them months of testimony compressed into notes and impressions, the quiet burden of deciding whether time had clarified the truth or distorted it beyond recognition. Outside, the courthouse exhaled into an uneasy stillness. Phones went silent. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. The town waited, suspended in a familiar tension that felt eerily similar to the one it had learned to live with decades earlier. Inside the room, the evidence was rearranged not as exhibits but as questions. How much weight could probability carry when certainty was impossible? Whether consistency across independent witnesses could outweigh the erosion of memory? Whether science, arriving late to the scene, could speak clearly enough to be trusted? The jurors argued carefully at first, respectful, tentative, each aware that confidence could be mistaken for bias. Hours passed. Lunch trays cooled. The night pressed against the windows. The defense had done its work well. Doubt had been seeded deliberately, cultivated patiently. Some jurors fixated on the absence of a confession, the lack of a single moment that placed the accused unmistakably at the point of violence. Others returned again and again to the DNA, to the improbable convergence of genealogy, soil, timelines, and behavior. Coincidence, they argued, did not stack itself this neatly without direction. By the second day, voices sharpened. Notes were reread aloud. Testimony replayed from memory. A timeline was drawn and redrawn until its shape became unavoidable. The debate narrowed not toward certainty but toward responsibility. Did the evidence meet the threshold required to declare guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, or had the desire for resolution pulled interpretation too far forward? The question hung heavy, unyielding. When the verdict finally emerged, it did not arrive as relief. It arrived as impact. The courtroom stood as one, a ritual gesture that felt hollow compared to the weight of what followed. The foreperson's voice was steady, practiced, betraying nothing. The words landed one by one, echoing against wood and glass, embedding themselves into the collective memory of everyone present. There was no outburst, no collapse. The accused absorbed the decision with a controlled stillness that bordered on disbelief, jaw tightening, eyes fixed ahead as if the room had shifted and he was determined not to move with it. His family reacted more visibly, whispers breaking into quiet sobs, hands reaching for each other in reflexive defense. Across the aisle, the victim's family remained seated, stunned by the finality they had imagined for so long and never quite believed would arrive. Outside, the town reacted in waves. Some felt vindicated, their long-held suspicions validated at last. Others felt betrayed, convinced that the case had been forced into resolution by technology and time rather than truth. The verdict did not unite. It clarified divisions that had always existed beneath the surface, revealing fault lines drawn by memory, loyalty, and fear. Sentencing followed weeks later, a procedural necessity that reopened the narrative once more. Prosecutors spoke of accountability delayed but not denied. Defense attorneys argued mitigation aged the distance between who the accused had been and who he now was. The judge listened, expression unreadable, aware that no sentence could rewind time or restore what had been taken. When the decision was announced, it carried the gravity of permanence, the acknowledgement that some actions, once committed, could never be fully contained by punishment. As the accused was led away, the cameras captured the moment relentlessly, freezing it into a visual shorthand for closure. But closure proved elusive. The family did not celebrate. They returned home to a house that still held absence in every corner, now complicated by the knowledge that the mystery had been answered without erasing the pain. Justice, they learned, does not arrive clean. It arrives tangled with grief, anger, and an unsettling quiet where anticipation once lived. In the weeks that followed, the case continued to echo. Appeals were filed. Experts debated the implications of genealogical DNA in legal journals and late-night panels. Other cold cases were reopened, inspired by the belief that patience and persistence could bend time toward accountability. The road where it all began saw an uptick in visitors, some curious, some reverent, some simply trying to understand how violence could hide so effectively in plain sight. The town tried to move forward, but forward felt undefined. Conversations returned cautiously to normal topics, yet the case lingered in the background, a reference point for discussions about trust, about how well people really knew each other, about what else might be buried beneath years of routine. Children who had not been born in 1988 learned the story as a cautionary tale, a reminder that certainty is fragile, and that silence does not equal innocence. The victim's name appeared again in print, this time framed by words like resolution and justice, but those labels felt inadequate. Her life could not be summarized by the circumstances of her death, yet history had a way of reducing people to their most violent moment. The family pushed back quietly, sharing stories that reclaimed her humanity, insisting that remembrance extend beyond the crime. For investigators, the case became a marker, a testament to the long arc of accountability and the risks inherent in revisiting the past. Some took pride in the outcome, others carried lingering doubts, aware that the standard of proof had been met but haunted by the knowledge that certainty remains an ideal, not a guarantee. Cold cases, they knew, never truly close. They simply change form. The accused settled into incarceration with the same controlled discipline that had characterized his public response. Appeals moved slowly. Letters were written. Silence returned, different now, heavier with conclusion. Whether guilt or innocence defined his inner narrative was something no verdict could fully access. Years later, the headlines would soften, the urgency fading as new stories demanded attention. But for those who had lived inside the case, who had measured time by its absence and resurgence, the impact endured. The cold case had been cracked, yes, but in doing so, it had exposed the limits of resolution, the way truth can arrive too late to heal and too soon to be forgotten. On that stretch of Texas highway, traffic continued uninterrupted, the land indifferent to human judgment. The night no longer held its breath there, yet the memory persisted, woven into the identity of a town that had learned, slowly and painfully, that the past is never truly past, and that when it returns, it does not ask permission. The appeal arrived quietly, folded into the legal system with the muted confidence of something inevitable, its language clinical and precise, its implications anything but. It argued process, not innocence, challenged methodology, not motive. It questioned whether the bridge built between 1988 and the present was strong enough to carry a conviction without collapsing under scrutiny. For the town, it felt like a rewind button pressed just enough to reopen the noise they had begun, cautiously, to lower. In court filings and interviews, experts dissected the case as if it were a specimen. Genealogical DNA, they said, was powerful but imperfect. Soil analysis could suggest movement, not intent. Witness memory was a shifting landscape, vulnerable to suggestion and time. Each argument landed not as revelation, but as erosion, slowly wearing down the edges of certainty the verdict had created. For some, doubt returned easily, familiar and almost comforting. For others, it felt like sabotage. The victim's family read the appeal line by line, translating legal jargon into emotional consequence. Each sentence threatened to pull them back into limbo, the state they had inhabited for decades where nothing resolved and everything lingered. They reminded themselves that appeals were routine, that the system demanded redundancy to protect against irreversible mistakes. Understanding the logic did nothing to quiet the fear that logic could still betray them. Investigators watched from the sidelines, no longer in control of the narrative they had painstakingly assembled. Their work was now a matter of record, frozen and vulnerable to reinterpretation. Some felt vindicated, others exposed. They revisited their own decisions privately, replaying interviews, wondering which moments would be dissected under appellate microscopes. The case had taught them patience. It was now teaching them humility. Media coverage shifted tone. Where headlines had once declared resolution, they now leaned into uncertainty. Questions replaced statements. Panels debated precedent. Viewers were reminded that cold cases, by nature, live in gray spaces where absolute clarity is rare. The story became less about the crime and more about the process, a referendum on how justice should behave when it arrives late. In the town, fatigue set in. People wanted to move on but found themselves unable to fully disengage. The case had threaded itself into their identity, a reference point for conversations about safety, trust, and time. New residents learned the story secondhand, absorbing it as local lore with legal footnotes. Old residents carried it differently, as a scar that still tingled when pressed. The appellate court scheduled hearings months out, prolonging uncertainty. In the meantime, related cases surfaced, encouraged by the same technology that had cracked this one open. Some led to arrests. Others collapsed publicly, reinforcing skepticism. Each outcome fed into the larger debate. Whether reopening the past honored victims or risked rewriting history with incomplete tools. Behind prison walls, the convicted man adapted to routine. He read extensively, wrote letters carefully, avoided conflict. His appeals framed him as a casualty of innovation, a man ensnared by evolving science applied retroactively. He maintained his innocence with consistency, a steadiness that unsettled both supporters and critics. Consistency, like calm, could mean many things. The appellate arguments unfolded in measured tones, attorneys sparring over standards and safeguards. Judges asked pointed questions, probing the reliability of evidence and the fairness of its use. No one spoke of the victim directly. Her presence hovered, implied but unaddressed, a reminder that the law often abstracts the very human cost at its center. When the decision came, it was neither explosive nor anticlimactic. The conviction stood. The court acknowledged the risks inherent in delayed justice, but affirmed that the accumulation of evidence met the necessary threshold. It was a reaffirmation, not a celebration. For the family, it brought a cautious release of breath, tempered by the knowledge that legal certainty does not equate to emotional resolution. The town absorbed the news with less reaction than before. The second wave of attention lacked the shock of the first. People nodded, returned to their routines, carried on. The case receded again, not into silence, but into a lower register of awareness. It had become part of the background hum of local history, no longer demanding constant engagement but never entirely gone. Years continued their steady march. New crimes captured attention. New headlines displaced old ones. The highway aged, repaved, renamed in planning documents. A small marker was placed near the site, understated and easy to miss, acknowledging loss without spectacle. Drivers slowed occasionally, curious, respectful, then moved on. The victim's family found their own way forward, uneven and personal. Some sought advocacy, speaking about cold cases and the importance of persistence. Others retreated, choosing privacy after decades of exposure. Grief reshaped itself again. Less sharp but no less present. They learned that healing is not linear, that justice can coexist with sorrow without canceling it. For investigators entering the profession after 1988, the case became instructional. A cautionary tale about evidence preservation, a case study in patience, a reminder that today's limitations may be tomorrow's breakthroughs. It influenced training, policy, expectations. The past, once an obstacle, became a resource. Yet beneath the procedural outcomes and institutional lessons, a quieter truth persisted. The case had not delivered the kind of closure people imagine when they hear the word justice. It had delivered accountability, contested and conditional, filtered through time and technology. It had answered some questions and intensified others, leaving behind a residue of unease that resisted neat conclusions. Late at night, when traffic thinned and the road grew quiet again, the stretch of highway returned to something resembling its former self. Darkness pooled at the edges. Wind moved through grass. The silence was no longer innocent, but it was no longer accusatory either. It simply existed, holding the memory of what had happened without commentary. The cold case had been cracked, yes, but its impact rippled outward in ways no verdict could fully contain. It changed how the town understood itself, how it measured time, how it defined justice. It reminded everyone involved that the past is patient, that it waits without urgency, and that when it finally resurfaces, it does so not to offer comfort, but to demand reckoning. And even as the legal chapter closed, another question lingered, quieter but persistent, threading its way through conversations and conscience alike. If this truth had survived decades of silence to be heard at last, what else remained buried, mistaken for absence, waiting for the moment when time would finally lose its grip? In the years that followed the appeal, the case stopped being an event and became a presence, something that lived alongside the town rather than interrupting it, a low-pressure system that subtly altered behavior without announcing itself. People learned how to carry it the way they carried weather, aware of its influence even when the sky looked clear. The headlines had faded, but the consequences had not. They surfaced in unexpected ways, in pauses during conversation, in the careful way questions were framed, in the instinct to double-check what once felt unquestionable. The legal affirmation did not silence debate. It refined it. Discussion shifted from whether the verdict was correct to what it represented. Was this justice finally catching up, or justice adapting itself to tools that changed the rules after the fact? Law schools cited the case. Conferences dissected it. Experts argued over thresholds and safeguards, over whether the past should be judged by the standards of the present or preserved in the limitations of its own era. There were no clean answers, only positions sharpened by conviction. The town became a quiet host to these arguments, its name invoked by people who had never walked its streets or driven that stretch of road at night. Locals listened with a mix of pride and irritation, protective of a story that outsiders now treated as a case study. For them, this was not an abstract debate. It was lived experience, layered with faces and voices and memories that did not translate easily into academic language. The victim's family continued to navigate a landscape reshaped by recognition. Invitations arrived from advocacy groups, universities, conferences dedicated to cold cases and forensic innovation. Some were accepted, others declined. Speaking about the case offered purpose, but it also risked flattening a life into a lesson. They balanced carefully, insisting on nuance, reminding audiences that behind every technological breakthrough sat human costs that no method could fully resolve. At home, the family adjusted to a quieter kind of grief. The question mark that had hovered over their lives for decades had been replaced by a period, but the sentence still hurt to read. They discovered that certainty did not erase longing, that knowing who was responsible did not explain why or return what had been taken. The absence remained, now accompanied by a complicated sense of vindication that did not always feel like relief. For the convicted man, time moved differently. Prison stripped days of distinction, reducing them to routine and repetition. His appeals narrowed. His arguments hardened into a consistent narrative of wrongful conviction, framed by the belief that science had overreached and the system had followed. He wrote letters to anyone who would listen, careful, methodical, appealing not to emotion but to principle. Some believed him. Others dismissed him. The divide mirrored the one outside, scaled down and intensified. Occasionally, new information surfaced, not enough to alter the verdict, but enough to stir discussion. A former acquaintance came forward with a memory previously deemed insignificant. A retired officer admitted uncertainty about a decision made under pressure. Each revelation was examined, contextualized, ultimately absorbed without seismic shift. The case had reached a kind of equilibrium, stable but never static, its details subject to reinterpretation without fundamentally changing the outcome. The highway remained indifferent. Construction crews repaved sections, smoothing over imperfections without acknowledging what lay beneath. A few locals avoided the route at night, choosing longer drives without consciously articulating why. Others passed it daily without thought, their familiarity acting as insulation. Memory, like trauma, distributed itself unevenly, settling heavily in some places and barely at all in others. New residents arrived with no first-hand connection to 1988. They learned the story through fragments, overheard references, a line in a local history pamphlet, a mention during community meetings when discussions turned to safety or trust. For them, the case was already past tense. A completed arc. Older residents noticed the difference and felt something like relief mixed with loss, aware that the story's emotional charge diminished as it moved further from lived experience. Law enforcement agencies across the state revisited their own unsolved cases, inspired and warned by what had happened here. Evidence rooms were reorganized, preservation protocols updated, databases expanded. The case became proof that patience could be rewarded, but also a reminder that reopening the past carried consequences that extended beyond the courtroom. Each decision to revisit an old crime now came with an implicit question. Was the community prepared for what might surface? The town council debated whether to formalize remembrance. Proposals ranged from a public memorial to educational programs focused on victims' rights. Discussion stalled over concerns about reopening wounds, about branding the town by a single act of violence. Eventually, compromise took the form of subtle acknowledgement, a scholarship fund, a quiet dedication that honored the victim without anchoring the town permanently to the crime. On anniversaries, the case resurfaced briefly, noted by local media, acknowledged with a tone that balanced respect and restraint. Each year, the language softened further, shifting from urgency to reflection. The story aged, acquiring the patina of history while retaining an edge that prevented it from becoming comfortable. Privately, some residents revisited their own roles. They replayed conversations, reconsidered silences, questioned why certain instincts had been ignored or rationalized away. The case encouraged a collective self-examination that was neither dramatic nor uniform, but persistent. It challenged assumptions about familiarity, about the safety implied by knowing someone's name or routine. It reminded people that proximity does not equal understanding. For younger generations studying criminal justice or forensic science, the case represented possibility. It suggested that answers could emerge even after decades, that dedication and innovation could bridge time's gaps. For others, it represented caution, illustrating how easily narratives could solidify before truth had a chance to surface, how certainty could be mistaken for resolution. As years accumulated, the sharpest emotions dulled, not erased but softened by repetition and distance. The case settled into a rhythm, resurfacing occasionally, receding again, its presence steady and unremarkable in a way that would have seemed impossible at the beginning. This too was a kind of outcome, not closure but coexistence. Late one evening, long after the last news van had left town and long after the courtrooms had emptied, a local drove that familiar stretch of road under a sky washed clean by rain. The asphalt reflected headlights in long wavering lines. There was no sign, no marker visible at speed, nothing to distinguish this place from any other. Yet for those who knew, the awareness lingered, quiet and insistent, a reminder that history does not vanish when attention fades. The Texas 1988 cold case had been cracked, its mystery reduced, its questions narrowed. But the unease it introduced never fully dissipated. It remained as a subtle pressure, a lesson etched into collective memory, warning that silence can be temporary, that answers can arrive too late to comfort, and that the past, once disturbed, rarely returns to rest exactly as it was. Time did what time always does after the noise fades. It normalized the extraordinary. The case slipped from the front of people's minds into the margins, where it lingered like a familiar ache that flared only when pressed. Yet normalization did not mean erasure. It meant the story had learned how to live among ordinary days, attaching itself to habits and hesitations, shaping choices quietly, without demanding attention. The courthouse returned to routine, but its hallways retained an echo that attentive listeners could still hear. Clerks who had processed the filings remembered the weight of those pages. Bailiffs recalled the faces in the gallery, the way breath seemed synchronized when verdict words approached. Even when new cases filled the docket, comparisons crept in uninvited, an instinct to measure everything against a trial that had asked so much of everyone involved. Across the state, the ripple effects widened. Cold case units expanded, budgets reallocated, training updated to include techniques once considered speculative. Evidence rooms were audited with a new urgency. Boxes were opened, inventories corrected, labels rewritten in sharper ink. Some discoveries brought promise. Others delivered disappointment. Each outcome reinforced the same lesson. The past does not yield evenly. It offers answers selectively, demanding patience without guaranteeing reward. The victim's name continued to surface in these conversations, sometimes as inspiration, sometimes as justification. Her story became shorthand for perseverance, for science catching up to silence. The family insisted on precision when they spoke publicly, reminding audiences that this was not a miracle but a grind, not fate but work carried out by people who refused to let the case dissolve completely. They corrected exaggerations. They resisted myth-making. They wanted truth, not legend. Within the town, personal reckonings continued in private. A former classmate admitted years later that he had avoided the victim's family out of fear of saying the wrong thing, a choice he now regretted more than any misstep. A neighbor recalled dismissing a strange encounter in 1988 as coincidence, wondering now whether curiosity might have changed something. These admissions surfaced quietly, not as confessions but as acknowledgments that proximity to harm leaves residue even when no action is taken. The convicted man's supporters grew fewer but louder, their arguments sharpening as avenues narrowed. They framed the case as a warning, a boundary test for forensic innovation. They circulated petitions, sought sympathetic journalists, invoked other cases where certainty had later unraveled. The effort kept the debate alive, ensuring the story never settled fully into consensus. For some, this felt necessary. For others, exhausting. For the family, it was a reminder that resolution does not end argument. It simply changes its focus. Inside the prison, routine tightened its grip. Days passed in measured blocks. The man maintained his pattern of correspondence, refining his narrative, emphasizing principles over particulars. He avoided discussing the victim directly, focusing instead on procedure and probability. To his allies, this restraint signaled integrity. To critics, it suggested detachment. Interpretations multiplied, as they always do when facts are finite and belief is not. Meanwhile, new forensic tools emerged, promising even greater precision. Algorithms improved, databases expanded internationally. The idea that older cases might still yield to future methods became both hopeful and destabilizing. If answers could arrive this late, what did that mean for convictions once thought unassailable, or for exonerations long delayed? The Texas case sat at the center of this tension, cited as proof of concept and as cautionary example in equal measure. The highway, subject to none of this debate, continued to host the same nightly procession of headlights. Yet small changes accumulated around it. A rest stop was renovated, signage updated. A new business opened nearby, drawing traffic at odd hours. Locals noticed how easily life layered itself over memory, how the present made use of space without consulting the past. Some found this comforting, others found it unsettling, as if progress itself were an act of forgetting. On the anniversary of the arrest, a local paper ran a restrained piece, more reflective than revelatory. It quoted no officials, offered no speculation. It acknowledged time, reiterated facts, and moved on. The tone marked a shift from urgency to stewardship, an understanding that the story now belonged to history as much as to the present. Readers absorbed it quietly, folded the paper, and continued with their day. Schools incorporated the case into lessons about media literacy and critical thinking, not as spectacle but as example. Teachers emphasized how narratives form, how certainty can be provisional, how evidence accumulates unevenly. Students debated fairness and innovation, some passionately, others abstractly. For them, 1988 was distant, a date rather than a memory. The case functioned as a thought experiment, its emotional charge muted by time. For the family, anniversaries became markers rather than wounds. They chose different ways to observe them, sometimes privately, sometimes in community settings that felt safe. They learned which invitations to accept and which to decline, which questions to answer and which to leave untouched. Their grief matured, no longer demanding constant acknowledgement, yet never consenting to invisibility. Investigators who had worked the case retired or moved on, carrying with them a professional touchstone. When asked about it, they spoke carefully, emphasizing teamwork and patience, downplaying heroics. They knew how easily stories of resolution could slide into self-congratulation. They also knew how many hands had steadied the process, how many moments of doubt had preceded progress. The case had taught them restraint as much as persistence. As years layered over the verdict, a subtle shift occurred in how the town remembered the night itself. Details sharpened in some accounts and blurred in others. Emphasis moved from fear to process, from shock to consequence. The crime became less about the act and more about what followed. A narrative arc defined by delay and rediscovery. This reframing did not diminish the violence, but it altered how people spoke about it, granting distance without dismissiveness. Occasionally, a traveler passing through would recognize the town's name from an article or podcast and ask about the case. Locals answered with practiced brevity, offering enough to satisfy curiosity without reopening debate. The story had become something to manage, not to relive. In that management lay a measure of control the town had lacked for years. Yet control remained imperfect. On certain nights, when weather pressed low and sound carried strangely, the past felt closer. A siren in the distance could still draw a breath short. A stalled vehicle on the shoulder could still tighten hands on the wheel. These reactions were automatic, learned responses etched into muscle memory. They faded quickly, but they existed. Reminders that experience imprints itself deeper than intention. The Texas 1988 cold case had evolved from mystery to model, from headline to footnote, without ever fully surrendering its gravity. It continued to influence decisions made far beyond its origin, shaping policies, debates, and expectations. Its endurance lay not in unanswered questions but in the way it had complicated the idea of answers themselves. And so the story persisted, not as a single narrative, but as a constellation of meanings, each held by someone different. For some it was justice achieved. For others, justice contested. For many it was a lesson learned too slowly and applied too late. The road remained, the town endured, and the past, though named and examined, retained its quiet authority, reminding anyone willing to listen that truth is not only discovered, but lived with long after the lights go out and the crowd disperses. The case never truly slept. It waited. It settled into files, into routines, into the subconscious of a town that had learned how to look forward without ever fully turning its back. And then, quietly, without warning, it stirred again, not with sirens or headlines this time, but with questions that crept in sideways, subtle at first, almost polite, the kind that arrive years after certainty has already been declared. It began with a whisper in legal circles, a motion drafted carefully, language chosen with surgical restraint. No accusations, no dramatic claims, just a request. A review. A reconsideration of evidence that had once been celebrated as definitive. The document circulated among attorneys before the public ever saw it, and those who read it felt a familiar chill. The kind that comes when something thought solid begins to flex. The argument was not that the science was wrong, but that it had been framed too cleanly. That probabilities had been simplified for a jury hungry for clarity. That context had narrowed interpretation. It was a challenge not to the data but to the story built around it. And stories, once built, are hard to dismantle without collateral damage. When news of the motion broke, reactions fractured instantly. Some dismissed it as desperation, a predictable maneuver from a defense with nowhere left to go. Others leaned in, cautious but attentive, aware that history is crowded with cases once deemed airtight. The town felt the split along familiar lines, neighbors weighing old instincts against new doubts. Talk radio seized on the development. Callers argued over details few truly understood, invoking terms like error rate and secondary transfer, with confidence borrowed from headlines. Experts were booked. Their measured explanations often trimmed to fit time slots that favored certainty over nuance. Each broadcast added heat, not light, amplifying tension that had barely cooled. The family was notified before the news cycle peaked. They read the motion together, line by line, absorbing its tone, its implications. There was no panic, only fatigue. They had prepared for this possibility, intellectually if not emotionally. Resolution, they had learned, does not protect against reopening. It simply changes the posture from pursuit to defense. In court filings, the prosecution responded firmly, reaffirming confidence in the conviction, while acknowledging the evolving nature of forensic discourse. They emphasized corroboration, the totality of circumstances, the convergence of evidence beyond any single test. Their tone was controlled, professional, but beneath it ran urgency. To defend a verdict years later is to defend not just a case but an era of belief. The judge assigned to review the motion approached it without fanfare. No promises, no predictions. Just a schedule, a framework, an insistence on order. The hearing was set months out, granting time for preparation and, inevitably, speculation. That gap became a vacuum filled by opinion. Documentarians returned. Some new, some familiar. Cameras lingered on sidewalks and signage, capturing visuals already archived countless times. Residents noticed how easily memory could be repackaged, how the same locations could be framed to suggest either closure or doubt. Perspective, they realized, was the most powerful tool of all. Within the prison, the man at the center of the storm adjusted his routine slightly. He read more, spoke less. Letters became more cautious, their language hedged with conditional phrasing. He avoided predictions. Those who knew him well recognized the shift as strategic. Those who opposed him saw it as calculated restraint. Interpretation remained a Rorschach test. The hearing itself unfolded without theatrics. No gasps, no raised voices. Experts spoke in precise terms, dissecting methods and margins. Charts were projected. Footnotes referenced. The courtroom felt more like a laboratory than a stage. Yet the stakes pressed heavily on every word, each syllable carrying potential consequence. When arguments concluded, nothing changed immediately. No ruling, no hint. Just silence. A familiar kind. The kind that settles after noise has exhausted itself. The town returned once again to waiting. Waiting reshaped daily rhythms. Conversations paused mid-sentence when someone approached. Opinions were tested quietly, shared selectively. People who had once argued loudly now chose discretion, aware of how little certainty remained. The case had taught them that conviction, once shaken, does not easily reassemble. During this period, a former investigator spoke publicly for the first time in years. Not to defend or accuse, but to contextualize. He described the limitations of the era, the decisions made under pressure, the trade-offs between speed and thoroughness. His voice carried no bitterness, only reflection. The interview resonated deeply, offering neither absolution nor indictment, just humanity. The victim's memory hovered throughout, sometimes invoked directly, sometimes indirectly. Her photograph appeared again, younger than anyone remembered now, frozen in time. For newer residents she was an image. For others she was a presence, still anchored to lived experience. The difference mattered, shaping how urgency was felt. When the ruling finally arrived, it was narrow. The motion was denied, but with commentary. The judge acknowledged debate, affirmed confidence, yet encouraged continued scrutiny of forensic standards moving forward. It was a decision that satisfied no one completely, which in itself felt honest. Certainty, the court seemed to say, has limits. Relief mingled with disappointment. For the family, it was another endurance test passed, another chapter closed with effort rather than ease. For supporters of the convicted man, it was frustration sharpened into resolve. Appeals were discussed, new angles explored. The fight did not end. It recalibrated. Public interest spiked briefly, then receded. Headlines condensed complexity into conclusions, then moved on. But beneath that surface calm, something had shifted permanently. The case was no longer just about whether justice had been done. It had become a lens through which justice itself was examined, its mechanisms exposed to light that revealed both strength and fragility. In the town, the road remained unchanged, the buildings steady, the nights quiet. Yet those who had followed the case closely felt altered, more cautious in their beliefs, more attuned to uncertainty. The past had reached forward once more, not to undo but to remind. The Texas 1988 cold case had survived another test, not by silencing doubt but by absorbing it. Its power now lay not in a single answer, but in its capacity to provoke enduring questions. Questions about evidence and memory, about trust and time, about how long a story can echo before it fades. And as the echoes stretched onward, carried by voices new and old, one truth settled in quietly. Some cases never end. They simply change the way they haunt, shifting from fear to reflection, from shock to vigilance, leaving behind a vigilance that refuses to sleep, even when the world insists on moving forward. Time pressed on with its indifferent weight, and the case adapted the way all enduring stories do. It embedded itself into systems. Not memory alone but policy. Not grief alone but procedure. The Texas 1988 cold case began to appear in footnotes of training manuals, in slide decks delivered to new recruits, in ethics seminars where instructors paused and let silence do the teaching. It was no longer just a story told, it was a reference used. Across law enforcement academies, instructors spoke about chain of custody with unusual care, invoking lessons learned when evidence traveled decades before it spoke. They emphasized documentation as survival, not bureaucracy. They told cadets that the future would judge the present with tools not yet invented, and that sloppiness ages poorly. In these rooms, the case was neither victory nor warning alone. It was context, a reminder that certainty ages, and responsibility must outlast it. Journalism evolved around it too. Editors demanded more caveats, more sourcing transparency, more space for doubt. The era of declaring closure had given way to a language of process. Articles referenced probability rather than proof, margins rather than absolutes. This shift did not please everyone. Readers accustomed to firm endings complained of ambiguity. But ambiguity, the case insisted, was honest. The town noticed fewer camera crews now, but more students. Researchers arrived with notebooks rather than lenses, conducting interviews not for broadcast but for study. They asked about impact, about resilience, about how communities metabolize unresolved trauma, even after verdicts are rendered. Residents answered thoughtfully, measuring words as if accuracy itself were a civic duty. At the center of these inquiries sat a question that refused to resolve cleanly. What does justice look like when time has rearranged everything around it? The victim was no longer a peer, but a figure from another generation. The family had aged into roles of stewardship rather than advocacy. The convicted man had grown older within walls that made years feel both compressed and endless. Justice in this landscape felt less like a moment and more like a posture. Inside the prison, routine gave way to ritual. Days marked not by novelty but by repetition refined. The man continued to file motions, fewer now, more precise. Each carried the weight of dwindling options, yet also the stubbornness of belief. Hope in this context was neither optimism nor despair. It was persistence stripped to its core. The parole board, when it convened, faced an unusual record. Public input poured in from beyond the county, beyond the state. Some urged compassion, others caution. The board listened, asked questions, deferred decisions. Their role was administrative, yet the moral gravity pressed heavily. They knew that release would be read as revision, denial as affirmation. Either choice would reverberate. Meanwhile, the family navigated a quieter landscape of triggers. A documentary clip resurfacing online. A comment thread reviving old accusations. A classroom discussion reported secondhand. They learned to curate their exposure, to choose when to engage and when to protect their peace. This was not retreat, but maintenance, the ongoing work of living alongside a story that refused to stay put. Anniversaries continued to arrive without apology. Some years they passed unnoticed by the wider world. Other years they aligned with developments, a filing, a ruling, a release of records, and flared again. The family marked them privately now, with rituals that acknowledged loss without inviting spectacle. Candles, letters, moments of stillness. Grief had become quieter, not smaller. In the broader culture, the case fed a renewed skepticism toward the language of closure. Podcasts dedicated entire seasons to exploring what happens after verdicts, after headlines fade. They traced the long tail of consequence. The careers shaped, the relationships strained, the trust recalibrated. The Texas case served as anchor, a touchstone for conversations that extended far beyond its facts. Lawmakers cited it during hearings on forensic standards, arguing for funding not just for testing but for education, oversight, and independent review. Bills were drafted, amended, sometimes stalled. Progress was uneven, but the conversation persisted. The case had ensured that silence would be harder to justify. The road, unchanged in its physical form, took on symbolic weight. It appeared in textbooks as a diagram, in lectures as a slide, in essays as a metaphor. A place where movement met interruption, where ordinary transit intersected with irreversible harm. Students wrote about it with distance, yet their words carried a seriousness that suggested understanding, if not memory. For longtime residents, that distance felt strange. They remembered when the road was just a road, when the night had not yet acquired meaning. They wondered whether forgetting would ever be possible, or whether remembrance had become a permanent feature of the landscape. The answer, they suspected, lay somewhere in between. The convicted man's name receded from headlines, replaced by abstractions. The defendant, the case, the ruling. This linguistic shift softened edges while sharpening focus. It allowed discussion of principle without constant personalization. Some welcomed the change. Others felt it erased accountability. Language like memory proved contested terrain. As years accumulated, the case's influence became less visible but more pervasive. It shaped expectations quietly, altering how people listened to claims of certainty, how they weighed evidence, how they responded to official assurances. It taught a generation to ask one more question, to read one more footnote, to sit with discomfort rather than rushing toward resolution. In the town, a new generation came of age with the story as backdrop rather than event. They knew it as history, not interruption. Yet its presence still guided them. An inherited awareness that safety and certainty are negotiated, not guaranteed. They carried this awareness into their own lives. Choices informed by a past they had not lived but could not ignore. The Texas 1988 cold case did not fade. It transformed. From shock to study. From headline to framework. From wound to scar that still signaled where harm had occurred. Its endurance lay not in perpetual drama, but in sustained relevance, a reminder that the pursuit of truth does not conclude neatly, and that justice, once invoked, demands ongoing care. As night settled again over the town, lights flickered on in homes where the case was no longer discussed daily, yet never fully absent. Somewhere, files rested in cabinets, evidence preserved against the future. Somewhere else, a family slept knowing tomorrow would be ordinary and extraordinary all at once. The story continued not because it insisted, but because it had become inseparable from the world that carried it forward, asking without urgency now but with unwavering presence, what it means to live after answers arrive, and what responsibilities remain when they never fully do. Decades had passed since that night in 1988, and yet the echoes of the crime persisted, subtle but insistent, winding through the town like a quiet current that refused to surface entirely. Even now, the road where everything began carried a gravity that ordinary traffic could not erase. Headlights glinted off asphalt, and at night the stretch seemed to hold its own memory, a place where absence and presence collided, where the ordinary and the tragic coexisted in uneasy balance. Residents knew instinctively that some locations keep secrets, that some spaces remember, even when people forget. The convicted man remained behind bars, his existence regimented, predictable, yet laden with reflection. Years of correspondence had produced carefully measured letters, sometimes revealing glimpses of insight, sometimes defensive reiterations of his stance. He remained a study in contradiction. Disciplined yet restless, reserved yet persistent. His life, like the case itself, was no longer about the immediate drama but about endurance, about the long arc of accountability, or at least its perception. The system had found a conclusion, but he remained an enigma, a presence that continued to provoke discussion, debate, and scrutiny far beyond the prison walls. Meanwhile, the victim's family carried forward a complex legacy. Their grief had matured but never fully softened. Each anniversary reminded them that closure is not the end of sorrow, merely a pause between waves. They had learned to navigate public attention with discretion, selectively engaging with journalists, students, and researchers who sought insight, refusing sensationalism while emphasizing truth. Their role had become dual, custodians of memory and participants in the evolving conversation about justice, evidence, and accountability. They bore the tension between preserving their private mourning and contributing to public understanding, knowing that each word spoken could influence perception, policy, and the expectations of others who might one day face similar uncertainty. In legal circles, the case was referenced repeatedly, sometimes for its success, sometimes for its limits. Appellate decisions were analyzed, critiqued, and taught in classrooms as examples of the delicate balance between innovation and fairness. Judges, attorneys, and forensic experts continued to discuss its implications. How far could technology reach in reconstructing the past, and how reliably could probability be treated as evidence of action? The conversations never ceased, only transformed, moving from the courthouse into lectures, academic papers, and professional symposia. The case had become both precedent and warning, a benchmark for diligence and caution. The town itself evolved, carrying the memory of the event without its immediacy. Streets were repaved, businesses came and went, and generations passed into adulthood without ever witnessing the original shock. Yet those who had lived through it retained a quiet awareness, a second sight that informed behavior, trust, and perception. Parents cautioned children not only about safety but about the fragility of assumptions, about the distance between what appears safe and what reality allows. Community meetings occasionally revisited the past in discussions about law enforcement, surveillance, or neighborhood vigilance, ensuring that the story remained a living influence on collective consciousness. Students of criminal justice visited regularly, some conducting research, others observing community response. They asked questions about procedure, ethics, and the human dimension of investigative work. They explored the interplay of memory, time, and evidence, seeing firsthand how decades of silence can shape both perception and practice. Teachers guided them carefully, emphasizing nuance, highlighting the difference between process and performance, between probability and certainty. Through these interactions, the case became a tool, a lens for understanding the complexity of truth and the responsibility of those tasked with pursuing it. Even the media, once relentless in pursuit of breaking updates, had shifted. Coverage was measured, analytical, focused on lessons rather than spectacle. Podcasts, documentaries, and articles framed the story as a study in persistence, technological evolution, and community resilience. The headlines no longer screamed but offered context, providing insight into the ways justice and memory interact across decades. The narrative had transitioned from event to emblem, from moment to enduring case study. Yet despite the apparent calm, the psychological and emotional imprint lingered. Former neighbors recalled unsettling moments once dismissed or rationalized. Long-held suspicions resurfaced in quiet reflection. Small triggers, a siren, a shadow, a familiar car, elicited automatic responses rooted in decades-old tension. Trauma, it seemed, does not age evenly. Memory does not soften uniformly. The emotional resonance of the night persisted in ways that the passage of time could not fully mitigate. The convicted man's correspondence occasionally found its way into legal journals or public discussion, always carefully edited to maintain decorum, yet carrying subtle undercurrents of challenge. He questioned interpretations of DNA, revisited timelines, and highlighted procedural nuances. Supporters circulated his perspective selectively, framing him alternately as a cautionary example of systemic overreach or a human enduring the consequences of delayed justice. The interplay between public perception, private conviction, and institutional authority became a microcosm of the broader tension inherent in cold cases, the unresolved coexistence of certainty and doubt. The family continued to honor the victim quietly. Small memorials were maintained privately. Scholarships or donations in her name ensured that her memory contributed positively to the community. They sought meaning without spectacle, purpose without intrusion, awareness without obsession. Their grief had learned to coexist with the passage of time, accommodating both remembrance and everyday life,